I first heard about this from Pirate Nation on X, and I kind of wanted to take this with a grain of salt because when I actually looked into it, I was like, oh, this might not be necessarily as bad as he's making it sound, but it also might be. So he says on X, Nintendo Switch 2 system on chip leaked using 2021 parts, quote unquote, considerably weaker than the Steam Deck, which I feel like this has already been debunked with the research that I did that I'll get into. So I'd be careful with this headline here. But yes, the 2021 parts thing is a part of it. But that doesn't mean that it's considerably weaker than a Steam Deck. We'll talk about that. But the motherboard of the Switch 2 console has reportedly leaked early, which in turn has provided new insight into how the console performs. And included in this insight is word of a major weakness of the console. This reads like AI wrote it, by the way, which is another red flag. More specifically, the CPU of the Switch 2 is notably lacking, which means the console may have a hard time running a few different types of games and genres, including open world games, real-time strategy games, simulation games, MMORPGs, and generally any games with significant physics and AI demands. ... and then ... which is weird. It appears the system on chip was taped out in 2021, which is true from what I've researched, which presumably means this console could have been released much earlier if it was not for the pandemic and the disruption it caused. Which is a very fascinating question that comes up from this. Is I know for a long time, especially like in 2020, 2021, that was like the peak of people talking about the Switch Pro and the new Switch. And Nintendo was silent for so long. And it makes you wonder, was the Switch 2 supposed to come out 3 or 4 years ago? Whoa. That's like a mind-bending thing when you start diving into what it says about it here. While the GPU has already been found to be quite weak, the CPU in particular leaves plenty of room for improvement, with testing finding it pretty weak. That's a wrong tense of week there. You need the W-E-A-K. This is like the calendar week, but whatever. And considerably weaker than 2022's Steam Deck. When running many games, this probably won't be much of a problem, but just like the Switch, it's going to keep a lot of games from certain genres off the Switch 2, especially high-end real-time strategy and grand strategy games. So I saw this here and I was like, okay, let me dive into this a little bit more because I'm very curious. And this is where I found this post, and I believe this is where it originated from, if I'm correct, which is Nintendo Switch 2 hardware leak reveals SoC and benchmark results for CPU and GPU. And it goes through them here on this handy dandy chart. Feel free to pause it and read through it if you care about that stuff, which I don't. I just want to know, relative to other consoles that I play, what's it like? Is it better or worse or the same? That's how these numbers work in my brain. And they go through talking about it here. And they say, that's incredible. I have no idea what they mean, but it looks amazing. The numbers, Mason. I like to think of myself as technologically literate. I put some RAM and hard drive into my laptop. I count my frame rate. No big deal. But I have no clue what the F any of this means. And they go through here, and this guy seems to know something. He says, to translate what's being said here and to add a silver lining, single core CPU power is twice that of the PS4, Xbox One. So that should be reassuring to people. Be like, okay, many people have put this on the same level, which I believe this goes into, as a PS4. But saying the CPU power is twice that of a PS4 is reassuring. They are all 8-core CPUs, so we can expect the total multi-threaded power to be much greater. Edit. Use wrong flops numbers. Raw GPU power is 1.7 teraflops. Handheld 3.1 teraflops docked. Okay, so half the power in handheld mode than when it's docked, which is wild that there's such a drop off. That's crazy. That almost makes me wonder if there are going to be any games that will be exclusive Nintendo Switch dock mode only games. I wonder, one, if that would ever happen, and two, if Nintendo even allows that. We're like, no. Games have to be played in both modes. You can't make a game that is docked only. I wonder. PS4 was 1.8 teraflops. Xbox One was 1.3. This doesn't take into account added RT cores, tensor cores, and just more modern feature sets that PS4, Xbox One straight up just don't have. We know the SSD game cards will be faster at loading than HDDs and Blu-rays, and it likely has 12 gigs of RAM versus 8 on the PS4 and Xbox One. This is all just raw numbers that don't mean anything until we start seeing actual games. But I think the Switch 2 will be a good bit more capable than a PS4, Xbox One. And that's on top of Nintendo, out of every company out there, arguably is the best company at optimizing their games for their own platform. So if anyone's going to make their games run better than they have any right running on a console, it's going to be Nintendo first-party games. Sergeant Sapien says, at worst, they'll say that games are optimized for dock play. That's true, but I almost wonder, to avoid bad reviews, if there's a way to be like, nope, we're just not going to allow it on handheld mode because we don't want a bad review saying, oh, it's so laggy. Because you know that's going to happen. And the reviews are more important than the usability of the games for a lot of these companies. So anyways, this Reddit post leads right into Twisted Voxel, which is where I found the article from that post. And this goes into the details here. It says, an analysis of the Switch 2 system on chip has been conducted by YouTuber GeekWarWarn, offering a detailed benchmark of the upcoming console's CPU and GPU. And when I read this, I'm like, you think the Nintendo ninjas would be coming after this guy? Unless he just found a comparable system on chip and ran tests and benchmarks against that. And was like, yeah, this is the same chip that will be in a Switch 2, allegedly. I still wonder how Nintendo feels about that. The Switch 2 CPU and GPU benchmark reveals major upgrades over the original Switch, with a chip that is more advanced and larger in scale than initially expected. So this is some good news here. That's why I was saying, take what Pirate Nation was saying with a heavy dose of skepticism, because the quotes that I was reading from that post, I couldn't find anywhere. The things that were in quotes that were saying significantly, what did he say? Considerably weaker. Like I searched the word considerably, it's nowhere on here. It's even larger than chips like RTX 3050 Ti Mobile, Apple's M2, AMD's Ryzen, Qualcomm's X Elite. The die, this is where Pirate Nation is getting the 2021 tape out. The die is labeled with a 2021 tape out date, suggesting that it was in development long before any leak had surfaced, which is, again, probably one of the wildest takeaways from this entire story. I don't want to like bury the lead, but at the same time, I'm like, does this give us some insight as to, was the Switch 2 supposed to come out years ago, and because of the pandemic, it booted it way down the road until now? Maybe, but at the same time, wouldn't they have more games out for it if that was the case? It makes you wonder. Because right now, what's the launch lineup? It's like Mario Kart, for first party, I mean, Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza or whatever. And that $10 demo game. I think that's it from first party, which is really not great. I mean, I guess you can count like the upgraded Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and whatever else upgraded games, but those are just unlocking the frame rates and doing things that you could do already with online pirating that they really cracked down on, and now we know why. Dreader1 says, if anything, COVID just delayed the R&D for the hardware. That could be as well. The CPU section includes 8 Cortex A78C cores, each with 256 KBs, LT cache, scared. Okay, all these numbers, great. The GPUs around 6 TPCs, all these other numbers, great, great, great. Talk to me in language that I understand article. CPU wise, Geeker 1 tested and a downclocked T234 at 1.0, 1.1 gigahertz. Compared synthetic results, older CPUs, the single core performance is about 2 times that of a PS4 and 3 times that of an original Switch. That is massive. That is massive. Like, sure, the Switch 2 is going to still struggle with some modern games, of course, because it's not up to snuff with the PS5, obviously, or Xbox One or PC, Steam Deck. But I would argue maybe it is up to snuff with the Steam Deck. I might actually put it on that level based off of everything that I'm reading. Maybe a little bit, a notch above Steam Deck. Putting in the range of a downclocked, while multi-threaded, Apple Bionic. Okay, despite the modest specs, Geeker1 noted that console optimization will be key, which is what I was saying earlier about how Nintendo is the best at optimizing their games. Even with a relatively weaker GPU, a console's tighter integration and lack of PC-style OS overhead means that the Switch 2 hardware can deliver competent performance that is comparable to the PS4. Which is great, except for, call me crazy here, but I don't typically, I guess unless I'm like on a cross-country flight going home to visit my parents or family, I don't typically play my Switch away from good internet. I mean, maybe when I'm in a hotel that has shitty internet, maybe that could be it too. But typically there's pretty good internet connection whenever I'm playing the Switch, or it's just around my house or whatever. Typically. And if that's the case, the PS Portal is literally a handheld PS5. So like when I'm laying in bed and playing a console, it's funny. My nightstand is hysterical. I should take a picture of it. It's got my Switch, it's got my PS5 Portal, and it's got my Steam Deck all on my nightstand. And I'm like, the only time that I'm going to be playing my Switch is if there's a game that comes out that's like Nintendo only. And that's like, oh, I want to play that. Like the Zelda game that came out that was like where you play as Zelda. That was like the last time that I was really playing my Switch, because all the other games I just play on PC or on my PS5, on my PS Portal. Revco says, you play games? Yes. The exaggerations from Hypnotic that I do not play games are greatly exaggerating. Yes, Solkino, the JDA woke Zelda game, that one. But that's the problem that I'm running into with the idea that the Switch 2 is going to be this major selling point for a console for people. Because I don't remember who was saying it in the chat earlier, but there was no competition earlier with the original Switch. It was kind of in a league of its own, and it took a long time for anyone to get up to speed with them. Now with the Switch 2 coming out, the Steam Deck's there, the PS Portal's out. Xbox, Microsoft is rumored to be coming out with some sort of portable console as well, potentially. But even without that, there's plenty of competition out there. And I find myself being like, well, I want to be able to play the games with the best possible settings on my PC that doesn't make it chug. And oh, by the way, I can play with the data and pick it up on my Steam Deck or play elsewhere without a problem. And oh, by the way, also Steam sales, much cheaper games, game gifting from you guys that have been incredibly generous. There's crazy amount of reasons to not buy games from Nintendo. And I almost feel like the walls are kind of closing in on Nintendo and nobody notices it and nobody's saying anything about it. But like the writing's on the wall right now. And I never thought I'd be one of those naysayers for Nintendo, the doom and gloom, because I'm like a huge Nintendo fan. I always have been. But I feel like Nintendo is not adapting to the world around them. Not that they ever have in the past either. And they've always found a way because of their games. But the problem is the competition has finally, and I think it's fair to say this, the competition has finally caught up to Nintendo. Where now that Nintendo puts a game out that's not assured to be the best of the games out there. And that used to be like an assumed thing when Nintendo would put out like Super Mario World or Ocarina of Time or Metroid Prime. It was pretty assumed that, okay, this is the best you're gonna get right now because it's Nintendo and they are ahead of everyone else. Nowadays, I don't know if that still holds true. So yeah, there's a lot to be concerned about with the Switch 2, going back to the whole, I wonder how many units they're gonna sell with it. But the biggest concern should be the price. But I'll leave that one there. I see the server says Nintendo has no competition. They do now. They used to kind of walk to their own beat of the drum. Nowadays, they need to actually look around because they will get surpassed. And then when you also pile in, um, I don't love Doug Bowser. I don't like Nintendo of America in Seattle pushing all this pride stuff, pushing DEI. And I do have concerns about Nintendo of America trying to inject woke stuff with Nintendo of Japan. I think they are trying to find a way to sneak in and seep into that with that ideology. But time will tell.